extremely well this evening. I hope you had a wonderful time celebrating Christmas last week. New Year's Eve is almost upon us, so I wanted to use this opportunity to thank you once again for the past year. I have enjoyed making these videos so much, and all your support and all your wonderful comments have made it all the more worthwhile for me. I hope 2022 is a better year for the world. I hope it won't be more of the kind of craziness that we've had to deal with in 2020 and 2021, aka 2020 the sequel. So I'm wishing you all the best for the new year. Tonight's video is going to be another creepy encounters from Reddit video. I've got 5 stories for you this evening. Some are short, some are a bit longer, and I hope you enjoyed tonight's video. But now, with that being said, and without further ado, let's get into tonight's stories, shall we? The first story that I've got for you this evening was originally posted by a user called Derangedbuffalo. Their story is called 3 salesmen rang my doorbell at 7:30 p.m. when I was home alone at 12. When I was about 12 years old, my mum was working later than usual, and because of that, I ended up being home alone. It was late summer, so 7:30 p.m. It was dusk, but not fully dark. I heard the doorbell go, and I assumed my mum had her hands full and couldn't find her keys. I opened the door, and I stopped cold in my tracks when I noticed 3 males standing there. They said they were from some kind of energy company, and they asked if my parents were home. I lied, and I said my mum was upstairs in the bath, and then I closed the door. I quickly sped down the hall and went into the living room, where I dropped to the floor in a panic, and I crawled to the window to look through it. I could hear them laughing, and they sounded like a bawdy group of lads on a night out. They knocked a few more times. This is when I started to fully panic. close to the front door. I mean, most people don't hide it under the doormat anymore because it's such an obvious hiding place, but other well-known hiding places are under plant pots or inside plant pots or under a stone on the driveway and also in the letterbox. So I'm just really glad that they gave up eventually and they didn't manage to get into the house because, you know, who knows what would have happened. My mum also taught us to never let in a stranger, to never buy something at the door, and, you know, to just send them away. And once, when I was a child, the doorbell rang, but my parents were home, and it was a guy from, it was a firefighter who was selling a calendar, and because my mum had always told me to not buy stuff at the door, I just was like, I'm sorry, we're not interested. And then my mom was kind of upset with me because she thought that if the house were to burn down, the firefighters wouldn't help us anymore because we didn't buy their calendar. Alright, time for the second story. This one was originally posted by a user called LottiesLo, and their story is called Sheriff Tried to Lure Me into the Back of His Cop Car. This just happened to me. I'm walking to my car and a sheriff's car is honking and driving by me. I'm thinking the sheriff needs to enter the driveway of the hotel I'm crossing, so I move out of the way. He then motions again, so I cross the driveway and he follows me. He then motions me over, all while his windows are rolled up. I remove my earbud and start walking closer. He rolls his window down and says, "Get in." And I'm like, what? He says again, "Get in the car." There's stuff in the front seat, so the only place to get in is in the back. I ask him for his badge number, and he rolls up his window again and speeds off, tires screeching. It literally took me a few seconds to realize what had happened, and I called Upster. I'm low-key shook. That is a predator, and he is using this uniform as power over women to possibly harm them. I'm upset at myself because, other than seeing the things in his car and the fact that he was in uniform, I can't give you details of what he looks like other than his ethnicity. The rest of him is just a blur to me. I already called the non-emergency number for the police department, but obviously they didn't answer. I'll be going in person to make a report. And then they posted an update. They've submitted a police report and they have realized that the guy in the car was definitely an imposter, so not so scary to think about that somebody with bad intentions, a sick person, a psycho, or whatever you want to call them, that they're able to get their hands on a police uniform and then try and lure young women to them that way. That is just terrifying to think about, because you trust the police. The police are there to help you, and there is a lot of people, I think, that if a police officer was to tell them to get in the car, they would just blindly obey. I'm actually quite proud of the original poster for asking him for his badge number. That was good and quick thinking. I'm glad that they filed a police report, because I can't imagine the police being very happy about, being impersonated for malicious purposes, or for any purpose for that matter. So I am very interested to see how this develops, and whether they'll find the guy who did it and whether he'll try doing it again, which, I'm assuming he will, because so far he hasn't gotten caught and he bought that uniform, so. But that's really scary, and I'm glad the original poster, thought on their feet and then trusted their gut feeling that something was off, so nothing terrible happened to them. Alright, moving on to the next story, which was originally posted by a user called quick-7654. Their story is called Creepy Red Van. This happened around 2003, when I was 12 or 13 years old. I'm a female. My mom had chosen to homeschool me that year, and for some reason had also tasked me with walking my younger sister, 9 or 10 at the time, to school. The walk was just shy of a mile each way. We lived in a very safe, smallish suburb, so I generally felt fine walking around by myself or with my younger siblings. On this particular morning, about 2 blocks into the walk, I noticed a large, old-looking red van parked on a road next to us. In the driver's seat was an older man, maybe in his 50s or 60s, just staring at us. He looked like a creepy Mr. Clean. I didn't get a particularly good feeling from him, but he was parked, so we just kept walking and we didn't think anything of it. We walked a few somewhat forgotten about the van until about a block into my walk home, I see it parked just ahead. At this point, I realize I can no longer justify this as a coincidence. I'm in danger. I don't have a cell phone and the streets are now empty because everyone is either at school or at work. Looking back, I should have just returned to the school, but that didn't cross my mind at the time. I walk more quickly and notice that he is now following me, slowly. I start changing up my route home. I quickly make a turn I don't need to make in hopes of throwing him off, only to find that he drove back around to cut me off at the end of the street. I am now terrified and I start sprinting as fast as I possibly can. He starts driving slightly faster behind me, clearly staring at me. I keep running and I duck into an alley with apartment garages in it. I see him looking for where I went and then driving up the block in hopes I went that way. I start running through apartment complexes instead of taking the normal street because I know if he catches me, I'm done for. I was a small child and no way I could have been able to defend myself. Finally, I'm able to make it to my street using my apartment complex hopping strategy. I see him at the intersection at the end of my block, but he hasn't turned in yet. I sprint across the street as fast as I can and run into my open garage, shutting it immediately. Once I realize I'm safe, I start uncontrollably sobbing. My mum emerges and she doesn't understand why I'm so upset. She didn't see the danger in the situation that I saw. I still asked that we call the police, but they said they couldn't do anything because technically nothing had happened. I still think about that day often, even after 19 years. I can relate to this on a deeper level. Like, in my life, have been chased on multiple occasions by creepy people in vans, and I know how terrifying it is to, experience that. And, you truly believe that you're in danger, which you are. But I can really, like I said, really relate to this, and I'm really glad that the person in the story managed to get away from him. Like she said, the smartest option would have probably been to go back to the school and ask an adult for help, but, they were 12 or 13, and hindsight is always 20/20. I just, every time we read these stories, I am baffled that people like this exist. Fully grown men emphasize the importance of always being aware of your surroundings whenever you're out and about in public, even if you're not alone, even if you're walking down the street with a friend or whatever. It's always very important to be aware of your surroundings, and it's ridiculous that that's necessary, and it's outrageous that that's necessary, but you know, these kinds of people exist and there's not much we can do about it. So whenever you're walking down the street, you know, take off your headphones and listen and look around you, and you've got to have your head on a swivel. Your safety is more important than listening to your music or listening to your podcast or whatever. Alright, moving on to the next story. This one was originally posted by a user called Tangerine-Sally. Their story is called The Foot Sticking Out of the Trunk. This happened when I was pretty young, 11 or 12 maybe. I went with my grandfather to this small, foreign, family-owned food store. When I say small, I mean the size of maybe 3 aisles of food. I was bored as my grandpa talked to the owner. I looked right outside into the small parking lot and saw a car with what looked like a human foot sticking out of the trunk. The car was packed in so it was easy to see. I was freaking out at the sight of this, of course. There was a couple nearby who had also seen it. They were speaking to each other in another language, which I understood, about what they saw. They were saying that probably someone murdered someone and put them in the trunk. They were whispering to each other in a very serious tone. They went up to the cashier, who was also the owner, and quietly pointed out what they had seen. I started to excitedly tell my grandpa in our language what was happening. Now, being that this was such a small store, that ruled out the couple who was also there, but there was only one other man standing in another aisle, so the car had to belong to him. The couple quietly whispered to the clerk that something had to be done. Me being a child, I'm almost having a panic attack, thinking we are in danger somehow. We all quietly watch the man as he goes up to pay for his stuff. The cashier, trying to sound casual, says, "Hey, is that a foot sticking out of your trunk?" The man says, "Oh yeah, but that's just plastic. It's a prank gift from my son." They have a laugh and off he goes saying that's really not funny. Looking back, you know, it is kind of funny if it's a plastic foot, but sometimes I wonder, what if it wasn't plastic at all? What kind of person would want to draw that kind of attention to themselves anyway? This is a really interesting one, and I can definitely imagine how you can get scared in that kind of situation at any age, not just as, you know, an 11 or 12-year-old. Of course, if they ask you if that's a human foot hanging out of your trunk, you're not going to just be casual about it and say like, oh yeah, that's just from the person I murdered. So, you know, of course he's going to say it's plastic or it's fake or whatever, but that doesn't mean that it actually was. Like, he's not just going to admit to there being an actual human foot hanging out of his trunk. Like, that would be stupid. But then again, it would actually be stupid to have the foot hanging from your trunk if you had actually murdered someone. So, you know, you can see it both ways here. Definitely a weird and creepy story though. Alright, moving on to the last story for this evening. This one was originally posted by a user called product number 753010. Their story is called After School. I was recounting this to my friends the other day, and even as an adult, it is still a bit terrifying to me. I grew up in a fairly large American city that has a reputation for not being the safest. However, I lived in an alright area. When I was in 6th grade, I was 11 and female. My school got out around 2 p.m, so I was home around 2:30. A few hours before my parents and brother would get home. My bus stop was a few blocks from where I lived, so every day I would walk alone from the bus stop to my house. One day, a few weeks into school, I got off of the bus and there was a man with a black duffel child home from the bus stop. Like, I truly do wonder, like, what does it take to decide to do that? Because, you know, it pops into your head, but what does it take for somebody to think that that is a good idea? Like, what kind of a twisted mind does that require? I'm so glad that this person once again reacted quickly, ran home, ran into the back door and locked it. I'm so glad they stayed safe. Like, they were so